The most thrilling, spine-tingling series ever.
From the pages of R.L. Stein's best-selling books,
And the screams go on forever and ever.
We now return to Goosebumps.
Greetings, Goosebumps fans, young and old, big and small, living dead and undead. Welcome back to the Goosebumps Crew Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Isaiah Vargas, and I'm joined by my good buddy, Nick Shaw. We are the Goosebumps Crew, and we're back to talk some Goosebumps. Unfortunately, Bjorn was unable to join us today, but that's okay. We got still a very special episode in store for you today. If this is your first time joining us here on the Goosebumps Crew Podcast, I want to sincerely welcome you all. If you are or have ever been a fan of the Goosebumps series of books or the franchise itself, then I have a feeling that this podcast is going to be right up your alley. Me, Bjorn, and Nick are some of the biggest Goosebumps nerds on the planet. I mean, we could talk about Goosebumps for hours, and that's exactly what we do right here on this podcast. So if you love Goosebumps, then make sure you tune in every week. We talk about everything Goosebumps, whether it be the books, TV shows, movies, video games, merchandise, whatever it is. If it has Goosebumps in the title, we're probably going to talk about it till the polar ice caps melt. So if you end up liking today's episode, make sure you like and comment. If you're watching us on YouTube, make sure you check out some of our other episodes of the podcast, as well as subscribe and hit the bell notification to get updated when new episodes drop. If you're just itching to get those new episodes early, if you want to listen to them a day early, you can follow us on our audio platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and iHeartRadio. New episodes go up a day early over on those platforms. And if you want to follow the Goosebumps Crew in some of our endeavors and the podcast, you can follow the Goosebumps Crew on social media, on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and Twitter. You can also follow Nick and Bjorn on Shawan and Goosebumps Aussie Fan, respectively, on their YouTube and Instagram accounts. All of those links are in the description below. So we thank you in advance for your support. Join the crew today and let's talk some Goosebumps. So we've said up to nauseating proportions at this point that the Goosebumps series was everywhere. It had so many endeavors besides the books and the TV shows, and live shows were no exception. As we talked about before, there's been many live shows for the Goosebumps brand, including Goosebumps Live on Stage, Goosebumps Horrorland Fright Show, which was in Disney World for about a year and a half, I believe. And if you watched episode 21 of the podcast, where we talked with Danny Bosch and John McClay, you'll know that there was also a Goosebumps musical that is still going on to this day since 2016. But there is another Goosebumps live experience that there's not actually much information about, so we're going to talk about it today. For anyone who knows about the 2016 live show, Goosebumps Alive, that was done in London, we're going to be talking about that today and finding out some information about that. And joining us to talk about this with us is...
Hi, I'm Samuel Wyer. I'm a production designer for theatre, opera, dance and film. And I was the production designer for Goosebumps Alive in London in 2016.
And we're very happy to have you here, Sam. Thank you so much for joining us. We're very excited to talk some Goosebumps with you.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. So to give a little background on Goosebumps Alive, so as we said, it was a live show that was started in London. This show opened in May 2016. It opens its doors to the public in London. It was an interactive show in the vaults underneath the Waterloo Station that sought to create an immersive theatrical performance based on the Goosebumps universe. And this show was essentially split into two different parts. You had one that was, of course, for kids. It was a little tamer, a little more, appropriate for kids. kids. But the main draw of the show was that it was a much more mature, much more gruesome and gnarly interpretation of the classic Goosebumps books for an adult audience. And it featured adaptations of multiple Goosebumps books, including Night of the Living Dummy, One Day at Horrorland, The Haunted Mask, and many, many more. So this was a very interesting experience, and we're going to delve into the depths of this show today. So I guess my first question for you, Sam, is how did this show come to be? How did Goosebumps come to London?
So, whilst it might not be like quite to the same extent as maybe over in the States or in other places, but Goosebumps was a great big success in the UK. It's a big cultural phenomenon, particularly around the time that the TV show aired in the 90s. And so as a result, you have lots of people in their 30s and 40s who were, who had their idea of storytelling and horror formed by those early viewings of the Goosebumps TV show and the popularity of the books at the time. And that's very much my a lot of them love, what would you say, generation, I suppose. So as you mentioned, in London, there is a venue called the Vaults, which was a huge underground venue made of a network of tunnels that were the old tunnels that existed underneath Waterloo Station. And they were run as an arts venue by a guy called Kieran Vanstone, who really, helped use this venue as a sort of incubation space for lots of exciting new shows, new projects. I actually was involved in the first ever production that went into that space with a company called Punch Drunk, who some of your listeners might know are an immersive theatre company from the UK, where they had Sleep No More in New York, which just closed recently after a decade, and lots of other like huge scale immersive productions. And so Kieran takes over the Vaults, and he's putting on all these different shows. And one of the shows that came to the Vaults in 2015 was our production of Alice's Adventures Underground, which is a sprawling, immersive show where the audience come in big groups, are sort of split up on their journeys, and they experience Alice's story. The following year, Kieran decided that Goosebumps could get the same treatment as our production of Alice's Adventures Underground. And so he pulled together a team of people. He knew me through Alice in Wonderland and various other things. He worked with this amazing production designer and art directors, Darling and Edge, who produced incredible parties at the Vaults. He reached out to Tom Salomon and Gabe Green, who he knew were working amazing immersive stuff over in the States, and various other people all got together. And in 2016, we staged Goosebumps Alive.
That is awesome. And as you said before, the Vault is like sort of an immersive like theater. It is underneath the Waterloo train station in London. So you have a bunch of sprawling like tunnels underneath here, which is perfect for really the kind of shows that it puts on. There's a lot of very gothic, dark, sort of horror-esque or mystery-esque shows that get put on in the Vaults. And I mean, that's perfect for Goosebumps. And there really hasn't been anything like that done before. As we said, there have been multiple live Goosebumps experiences, but they're mostly stage shows or sort of like in terms of like musicals, or even in terms of the Disney show, it's sort of like a walk-up like performance. But this was the first time you got to be inside not only an immersive experience, but a maze. And as I said, that this was also geared towards, you had a kid's version, of course, but this was more geared towards the adults that grew up reading the Goosebumps books and maybe nostalgic for it. And it didn't hold back from what I've heard in certain scenarios. The monsters were much more grotesque in their design. There was a lot of jump scares. There was a little more horror to the scenarios, which was pretty interesting. So my second question is, what was the process for turning Goosebumps into more of an adult experience? Where did it all start?
Well, I suppose something good to mention before I answer that question directly is the venue where we put Goosebumps on, which the vaults underneath Waterloo Station, is part of this sprawling network of tunnels which go all through that area of London. And in the production of Goosebumps, we're exploring some of these tunnels, and they went on a lot further than I thought. There's about 2 square miles of them, and they're vast. They are, they can be between 50 and 100 meters long. They're all about 8 meters high, and some of them were called the cemetery tunnels. And the reason they were called the cemetery tunnels, these are the ones that are adjacent to the ones we use for Goosebumps, so right next door. They're called the cemetery tunnels because during World War II, when all the bombs were dropping and people were dying left, right, and centre, the practicalities of moving these bodies out to places where they could be buried were such that they would hoard all of the bodies in these tunnels underneath Waterloo Station to keep them cool and keep them out of the air. Before they went out on a train line from Waterloo called the Necropolis line, which used to take the bodies out to these cemeteries, these new cemeteries that were being built out of London. So, really, as a space to tell these stories, it was perfect. And in answer to why, I suppose as I said, our generation sort of took these stories into our adult lives, and there's a huge amount of nostalgia for them. But there's also there's no doubt that they somehow reflect on the way that we view things in the world that are sort of like scary to us nowadays. And so really there was a sort of urge to recreate that feeling you have when you're a kid, but translate it in a way that felt like vivid and exciting and relatable and terrifying. And actually, production-wise, during the script process, with Tom and Gray working the script, there was lots of really exciting push and pull between the updating of it to a completely modern, completely relatable script, and the nostalgia of the version that we learned as kids, and trying to work out what level of adaptation we wanted to create. How much do you want to talk about like modern technology, for instance, and how much do you want to talk about like old junk shops? And they were sort of like on a seesaw, really, of like, and how much do you want to talk about like kind of modern consumerism, and how much do you want to talk about like some of the more like childish concerns, I suppose. So we were really trying to, all the time in creating the show, find that balance between hitting that nostalgic, adventurous, childish feeling, and having something that was, as you say, more sort of scalpel sharp and like really like got to the heart of your like adult fears and adult concerns.
Absolutely. And in just about every way, I feel like it really set out to do what it was meant to do. If you take a look at pictures of the event, like it is a much more dark and gothic version of Goosebumps than most people might be familiar with in terms of the original books. And it makes for a very interesting and new experience for many longtime fans. So this show did many adaptations. Did it have like a central story to it?
Yeah, so the structure of the show basically was all of the groups amassed and they were given cards, and the cards had a symbol on them. And there was a rat, a snake, a spider, and a crow. And each of those were sort of arranged in a symbol form. And that dictated the path that you were going to take. And you would, as an audience member, basically have one of two paths, really, although there were 4 groups. It helped us move people around. So you might have gone and seen the Cuckoo Clock, or The Blob That Ate Everything, or Say Cheese and Die, or The Haunted Mask.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you'd have done two of those, switched around, and then as a larger group of, I think, about 50 at this point, you would then go and you travel to a larger room where you might see Don't Go Into the Basement, or the Scarecrow story, which I can't remember what it was called, but you know the one, famous, yeah. the Scarecrow story.
Scarecrow Walks at Midnight.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. And then throughout the production, you're sort of a voyeur in these stories. Occasionally, the characters will be interacting with you. Occasionally, you've got a sense you're sort of like pressed up against the glass. But all the way through, right from the very beginning of the show, there were these stitched in these little motifs and little laughs and little giggles that went around that sort of unsettled you. Little things would happen. There were these little micro scenes. So we had Horrorland, where there was a sort of musical moment that was very interactive. We had a lift sequence where a monster reached and grabbed you in the lift. We had a grave digging sequence. We had a ghost story in a tent. These sort of little pocket experiences that were happening as well at the same time, that were really about like the sort of interactive quality, as well as these larger stories. But all the way through, there was this sort of super narrative that was slightly woven in around, of course, Slappy. So Slappy would appear in various incarnations throughout the show, sometimes as just a placid doll on a stage, sometimes a box labeled with Slappy. He would appear and disappear, and strange things, unexplained things would happen around this doll. And then as you found yourself going towards the end of the production and everyone filed into the biggest, darkest tunnel of all, it was Slappy's finale. And it was very much about like him sort of punching through reality and pulling you in. And the Slappy that you'd seen in the previous iterations started scaling up and scaling up and scaling up, until eventually we had multiple Slappies and a 30-foot giant Slappy that burst out of the smoke and the darkness and ran towards the audience. So that was the arc.
That is really cool. I was curious because, you know, there's so many. I believe it said there was like 19 different rooms, each with a reference to a Goosebumps book, and it's so cool that there are so many different references. You know, you have your main stage. You know, like the Slappy, of course, is a Goosebumps, you know, tradition to put him in. But then you had like the Haunted Mask. But then you also had stuff like you had said, like the Blob That Ate Everyone, or the Scarecrow Walks at Midnight, or Stay Out of the Basement. You know, books that are not normally like you don't normally see those in sort of like big scale adaptation. So it's so cool that you can really delve into the Goosebumps franchise and pull out those different stories and make something new with them, which is it is really interesting. And I love the idea of Slappy sort of like trying to punch through reality. I love that idea, and just the fact that the deeper you go in, the more his influence like sort of takes over. Like that's an amazing idea.
Yeah, well, that's very kind of you. What was really important to us, whatever the context of the stories that we told, was that we were sharing the love and the enthusiasm and the nostalgia. I mean, you've got a podcast because you know that there is like so much detail and various iterations to explore in these various stories, and so really, even in some of the more full-on scenes, we had little clues around the place that related to other Goosebumps stories. So if you were a real big Goosebumps fan, you could spot like an article from one of the from one of the other stories, like maybe up on a shelf. And the junk shop we had in Say Cheese and Die was a really good place for hiding lots of Goosebumps detail and sort of sometimes memorabilia, sometimes clues to other stories. So really it was a kind of love letter to the Goosebumps universe. A lot of that, of course, was lost on people because as soon as you cram everyone in a room and someone's there in your face talking, like, you're captivated. That's all that's happening. But for those people that find immersive theatre more of a thoughtful place, and they had a whole sort of world to explore, and we had lots of return visitors because, as I said, there were different routes to take and different stories to see. So yeah, it was really exciting.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, the idea of a maze of Goosebumps is a really good one because you get to really get into the stories in a way that hasn't really been done before. So when it came to, I guess one thing I'll bring up really quick is that this show also had a pretty interesting soundtrack. The band The Tiger Lilies did an entire album worth of Goosebumps related songs. I actually had listened to the songs before I knew they were tied to this show, so it's pretty interesting. Was there any process in getting them on board and them making the songs? I don't know if you would happen to know.
I don't know the details of it. I know that Kieran is a very brilliantly bold human. So he approached the Tiger Lilies and they said yes. He approached Tom and Gabe, and they said yes. We even approached Henson, and we looked at. We engaged Henson in a quoting process for the show, Jim Henson's Creature Workshop, and they were really up for it. But unfortunately, our budget couldn't quite manage what it was that they were proposing. And in the end, I've worked with lots of incredible puppet makers and mask makers, and I'd like to talk a little bit about the masks in a minute. But the Tiger Lilies were another just incredible component that Kieran sort of reached out to and stuffed into the show, and they were fantastic. The pieces they did were the perfect. They had the sort of perfect quality of mischievous fairground nostalgia with a sort of modern, sort of bombastic, unsettling quality as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's always the thing about Goosebumps is that, and I was actually about to say, was the Tiger Lilies songs, and like I said, I've listened to them, certainly have that sort of creepy feeling to them, but they also, as you said, have that bit of mischief in it, and that's exactly what Goosebumps is. It's that mixture of horror and humor. You can't have one without the other, and that's what makes it so unique, and that's what I personally believe made it so successful in terms of kids reading it. Is you have the horror, but you also have that bit of the goofy angle that sort of maybe takes a little bit of the edge off, so things don't become too scary for kids, which was always just the secret formula to those books and why I personally believe they became so popular. So it's a crucial component in just about everything Goosebumps related, is to make sure you have that balance of horror and humor. I believe we mentioned this when we talked about the aforementioned Goosebumps musical with Danny and John. We talked about how the reason that project worked so well is because, again, it had that mixture of the humor and horror. Now, to be fair, that musical is a little more geared towards kids than Goosebumps Alive is. But again, even for adults, you need to have that certain blend that makes it feel like Goosebumps in just about every single way. So I personally agree.
So I was waiting to get to the mask part too, because I'm a big mask collector. Masks are my things. So, and with Goosebumps Alive, because there's not a ton of stuff out there about it, I'm definitely interested in the masks and the mask making process, like how you guys took what the book covers were, or maybe the 90s show, but then how you transitioned that to make it your own thing for your show.
Well, so I suppose first of all, there was a design process. I should say at this stage, in terms of all the characters and everything, I also worked with a fantastic costume designer called Susan Kulkarni, who worked on all the costumes for the show. A lot of them were, as I said, very contemporary, very relatable, but amongst them, of course, were these fantastic characters that sort of like, were strange and unusual. I work a lot in puppets, puppetry, and have always had a sort of quite macabre like aesthetic when it came to those things. And we mentioned Alice's Adventures Underground the year before with Les Enfants Terribles. That was a grotesque sort of children's sort of, it was a reimagining. Alice is the perfect example of something that is on the surface very childlike and very entertaining, but actually is can be very dark and very mischievous and relates to our modern world. So with Goosebumps, we had, of course, amazing source material. I was aware of referencing the visuals from the books and things, but not too heavily. I wanted our story to tell its own tale, and so I enjoyed looking for taking the color palettes from certain things and exploring them and playing with them, doing lots of drawings, and then we had the overall character design to consider. Now, I haven't before or since worked in latex mask form, but for this show, it was perfect. It was that I really believe in the right thing for the right reason, and for Goosebumps, particularly for the scarecrows, particularly for Slappy, and then of course the haunted mask. That Halloween aesthetic of a mask wearing person really fitted beautifully with everything we were doing, and it felt like you were involved in a sort of Halloween story, and even the rubberiness of the masks I think really helped. It wasn't we weren't trying to be too authentic. We were trying to be playful and engaging, so we could get really grotesque with the masks and the scarecrows, these sort of collapsed pumpkins and things, and we could go really nasty with them because there was a sort of playfulness to the whole execution. And in finding the right process for this, I got in touch with an amazing mask maker who lived in my part of town, called Tom Howell, who runs a company called the Ministry of Masks, and they do all sorts of extraordinary things. I bought a beautiful Princess Mononoke mask from him. He does Bane masks. He's obviously done some fun political masks. He's done a great sort of Mickey Mouse. It's also punked up, and I did a series of drawings for him, and then he works these masks up larger than size in clay, and does these kind of beautiful clay sculpts of them, and we'd go in and we'd note them and make changes, and he was very open to collaborating and evolving things, and then he cast them in these great big beautiful plaster casts that he made, fill these things up with latex. The plaster takes the moisture out of the latex, and you get this brilliant rubber head. And so he did our Slappy, he did the pumpkins for Scarecrow Walks of Midnight were just exquisite. They're some of the best masks I've ever seen. And of course, the Slappy ones are just fantastic too. We worked on different looks for Slappy. At one point there was multiple Slappys. Each one had different colorways on their face, different hair, using different fur fabrics and things like that. And so really for this show, it was the perfect collaboration of a sort of someone who understands a sort of ghoulish mask aesthetic. But Tom from Ministry of Masks over here in London, it's just really fantastic work.
Absolutely. And I gotta say, when it comes to the masks, the costumes, the sets, everything about this whole experience is almost like walking into a nightmare. The proportions are are exaggerated. The monsters are much more threatening looking. It's almost like as a kid when you like see something really scary and then you have a nightmare about it and everything is just much more scarier than it may appear. Because everybody knows, like, going to the books and everything, everybody knows like what Slappy looks like in the books, or the Haunted Mask was like, or the Scarecrows. Here, the exaggerations are like so extreme that it's almost like it makes it freakier, and even down to the set design where there's like, I mean, I just love the set design for every single individual room. So like for Horrorland, for example, it is like a theme park aesthetic, but everything looks like run down and like abandoned, and it just adds to that creepy aesthetic. Or the Scarecrows, where you start out in like a corn maze, so you're like going through these super long corn stalks underneath a beautiful sky set. And then it leads you to the house, like this old farmhouse. And you're like surrounded by those corn stalks. Like that's a really freaky image, is just a house just surrounded by corn where anything can just be like lurking within. So it's those kinds of aesthetics that really add to the atmosphere. Absolutely.
My art directors on the show, who were called Darling and Edge, were just fantastic in their ability to sort of take what I was proposing and just exaggerate it, stretch these things. So the corn maze that you're talking about, all the tunnels were limited to 8 meters wide in order to make them feel much bigger and much more vast. If you limit the amount of space you're allowed to spend time in, so you're not quite sure where the edges of the space are. And then we Harriet, with her incredible painting technique, elaborated all up the walls with like paint to make the corn look like it was sort of going on for miles. And then, as you say, we plonked a house in one end that was a picture perfect sort of like 1950s American country house, and then in the other end we had the elaborate barn, which is just perfectly placed for like shooting light through to create sort of like fingers of light in the smoke and everything like that. And all throughout the performance, as you say, they took these ideas that we were having and we sort of exaggerated them, stretched them. The corridors, as you walk down them, feel like they seem to shift underneath your feet. We used lots of lovely optical illusions and geometry to kind of keep you unsettled at all times. Where there was an opportunity for a right angle, we always skewed it.
Yeah, like I said, it's exaggerating those to make you feel like you're in like another world. You don't feel like you're in the real world. You feel like you're in like a giant nightmare that you can't wake up from, and that's always a great experience.
I think when you're doing, especially in immersive theatre, I think that's the principle. As a designer, that's the principle that you always need to work under, is how do you draw a great big line around the world and the rules of the world so that when someone's inside it, they're immediately there. They immediately have everything they need to know how to interact with it and how to feel. They know that they know whether they're going to be played with, or they know whether they have to like play themselves in order to discover things. But really, you're setting the parameters of the world, and that gives you opportunity to twist and turn and bend and give people the experience you want to give them.
Absolutely.
So what happened to all the masks and stuff after production was wrapped? Did you get to keep anything cool, or?
So I did get a few bits and pieces. Yeah, I think I got one of the Slappy masks and these amazing casts of the Slappy masks that we did in resin to be used as the ventriloquist dummy version. Most of the objects went into an amazing bar in Waterloo called Vaulty Towers, which was an extension of the Vaults business. So on Lower Marsh, by Waterloo Station, amongst the sort of various hotels that have been popping up and fancy coffee shops, there's this bar which looks like it really shouldn't exist. And you step in, and right above your head are these great big hands from the Slappy scene, and they got a big head above you. And there's a tree house from another production I did of Dinner at the Twits. And there is like a dead monkey from the same production. There's bits of Goosebumps. There's bits of Alice in Wonderland. There's bits of Fantasia, which was a production that Volts put on a couple of years later, and amazing little bits and pieces from all the events and parties that Darling and Edge put on. So it's really like you were saying about the Horrorland set. If you imagine that was dense and fun and full of fairy lights and feathers and various sort of masks and costumes from pantomimes and all the rest of it. That's what Vaulty Towers is like. So it's a little bit of a portfolio. You can walk in there and see certainly a few years of my productions at Vaults.
That's awesome.
It's really cool.
Mm-hmm. I'm just glad that stuff, like, it still exists and is still cherished in a way. One of my greatest fears when it comes to these live productions is that things just get discarded. These bits of history, like, really, they really are, just get thrown away, not a second thought about it. And it really stinks. So to hear that it can be set up for, people to see for years to come is a very relieving thing to hear, personally. But
yeah, and that's why I asked the question, because it's always like when we had Ron Stefanik on, and he was the lead monster maker for the 90s show, him and his team. Like, some of the stuff he would say, like, it wasn't built to last. So the stuff was just like pretty much done right after they shot it for that episode. And it's kind of sad to hear that. And then see some of the stuff today, but, like, again, stuff wasn't meant to last. But a lot of it, even like down to Tim Jacobus's original artwork that he painted for the covers that he would send in by mail to Scholastic. I guess Scholastic just has them in a vault. Like, no one can enjoy any of that. Like, that's terrible. Like, why won't you have that on display for people to see, or have it travel, like, through different, like, for instance, where I live in Indiana, in Indianapolis, there's a children's museum, and they always change out different parts of it throughout the year. And a lot of it does have, like, historic stuff in it. Like, they do a superhero one. Well, there's stuff from the Adam West Batman show that travels and comes there. They've had Batmobiles there and stuff like that, or Scooby-Doo and a bunch of other things that they bring there from history, but they've never done Goosebumps, which I find very fascinating. But something like that, I mean, like, would be, I think, really great if the public could see this stuff. So it's really nice to hear that.
You can always reach out to Kieran and get some. Definitely.
That would be pretty.
I think when you're in terms of the preserving things like this, I think you need first of all, you need someone to have belief in this thing having a future life. And I think we're talking a lot more nowadays about longevity and things. We're, like, trying to be less wasteful because we're realizing how much stuff we're just, like, pouring into the planet. So people are trying to make things a little bit more long lasting in terms of their I don't know, like it's all like gadgets and tech and things. People are trying to make them more long lasting than they used to be, more disposable. Then the next thing, of course, is that production budgets usually mean that things have to be made how they're made for that moment, and then they might not last. But in terms of archiving things like artwork and imagery, someone needs to have thought to have kept it. And then the next thing you really need is, like, either commitment or connection. That's someone who's committed to going around finding these things, regardless of, like, cost or energy. Or you need connection. You always, the amount of things that are there waiting in the world to be shown, but without one person talking to another person, they're never going to be never going to get out there, because you need, connection makes the opportunity for these things to be shown. So, I mean, you guys are amazing archivists of all of the kind of Goosebumps merch that I can see around you. And we were talking a little bit about before we started recording. But it's really important to preserve not only the sort of the product side of things, the commercially available side of things, but also, like you say, the memories and the original materials where possible.
Absolutely. It's important. Again, it is history, even if in the moment it doesn't seem like it would be, it really is. Because I mean, people put their, blood, sweat, and tears into a lot of this stuff, especially when it comes to the sort of stuff that you do. That stuff's not easy, and you don't want all that work to go to waste, no matter the situation. So anytime that something like that can happen where it can be repurposed or reused or displayed for all to see, I think is quite a win for anything, because it always stinks when somebody's hard work goes to waste, and and I don't think anybody wants that for anything they make. So it's always relieving to hear something like that.
Good.
My next question is, so we know a lot about sort of the adult experience, but as I said earlier, there was a more kid-friendly version of this experience. I've heard many different names for it. I've heard it was just called Goosebumps Kids. I've heard another name called Museum of the Weird. Can you tell us a little bit about that side of the attraction?
Yeah, so the production was called Goosebumps Kids. And when you arrived for the production, you were welcomed to what they were calling the Museum of the Weird. So you immediately entered a performance space where the ruse was that there was a museum, and this museum was full of all these like objects and artifacts. And where it differed from the adult production is for the consistent experience of the kids. They were led through the space with a performer who was their sort of guide throughout the entire thing. There was sort of museum curator, which allowed them to sort of have the experiences they were seeing through that person, and also feel like there was always someone there, like on their side. So if it did get a bit too scary, you essentially had a guide. Much the same as going on a trek through the jungle or something like that. You feel a little bit more secure in all of the chaos and danger around you if there's somebody there, like sort of supporting you. It was the Museum of the Weird, and various of the production spaces and the sort of technical tricks that we set up for the production spaces. So like big lighting changes and costume changes and things like that were utilized to tell sort of kid-friendly versions. Interestingly, we obviously had a great model in the original Goosebumps books for these things, but we actually found in the execution that we needed to be a bit more child-friendly than the books were, because the books, you take them to a corner under your bed sheets, the playground, and you sit and you read them, and if it's too much you close it and you put it away, or you talk to someone, or you just know you're holding it in front of you in this sort of made-up world. When you're actually in amongst it all and you don't know what the rules are, and you're playing with the idea of surprise and expectation and anticipation, that could be a lot more terrifying for a kid. So we had a lot of fun playing with the level of scare and all that sort of thing, and ultimately found that this idea of framing the entire thing as a museum that sort of got out of hand, a bit like a museum that's come alive, a little bit like Night at the Museum, and made that we could showcase all of the amazing sets and things that we'd seen, but as artifacts. Tell these stories as stories, and then the stories themselves would come alive a little bit more and take over. So yeah, that was the kids' experience.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting, and you're right. Like we said before, with the Goosebumps musical, even though you have that blend of horror and humor, when it is in front of a kid, it doesn't seem so make-believe anymore. When you're a kid and you're reading these books, like you said, you can close the book or just be like, oh, it's just pretend, it's just a book. But unfortunately, when it comes to kids stuff, you do have to be a little more cautious, because you don't want to, scar the kids or give them like terrible nightmares or anything, or maybe you do. I mean, maybe it's your.
I was gonna say, depends on your intention.
I think when you've got a batch of kids and you're playing to lots of different levels of tolerance, and so I think that's the really interesting thing, is finding the thing where you can be as fun and as, I suppose, delightful and engaging and drawing in for those kids that want to do that, and then as there's the opportunity for kids that don't want to do that to sort of step away and feel safe. And I think that's what we sort of did. We weren't looking at like scares that were like, this is a level C scare, and so everyone will be scared to level C. What we were trying to do is create a story that was involving enough that the kids would put their own effort into like enjoying it. But if you weren't sure, you could just like, it's still just a story. So just like sitting around a campfire telling tales, you don't have like huge props and special effects to do those things. It's up to you how much you sort of like feel in the telling of that story. And that's the version that we tried to do. With the adult one, it was different. We sort of tried to be a bit more like objective, like we did things that would affect you in big ways. So that,
yeah, you would actually like scare, adults, but you wouldn't like jump out and be like, rah, to the kid, because the kid might, react in a way that you don't intend for. I mean, I don't know many kids.
They do piss.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, they either piss themselves, they cry, or maybe the occasional kid would just deck you in the face. You don't want any of those things. So
exactly.
I think most adults would do that last one too. So
yeah, actually, we did have we had a few moments where we had conversations about moderating what we were doing, because some people got like, this show, whilst it was a theatre production and an immersive theatre production, 2016, I suppose immersive theatre really came into its own between around 2013 and 2018. It was only 5 years in which every year new productions are being put on, and each one has a different set of rules. Sometimes it's basically a party where you go in costume and there are actors around entertaining you. Sometimes it's a free roaming experience where there's a narrative that you're free to explore completely on your own terms. Some things are like escape rooms where you have to like interact with everything. Some things are like, these big horror jump scare things. And the thing is, in any one audience of like 100 people, you could have one person imagining that it's going to be any one of those things. And so you could have someone who thinks it's going to be like the most horror physical thing possible, one person who thinks it's going to be like a sit down and play. So we had to sort of cater to all those environments, all those opinions and preconceptions. And it meant that we had a couple of people get like performers get pushed around by audience members who got a bit physical with them because of the scares. We had audience, the world of immersive theatre was constantly learning about how audiences interact when you take away their reality. And there's, lots of mistakes being made all the time. But I think that, more and more companies, production companies, directors are trying their best to give everyone the safest and most engaging possible experience, whilst not compromising on the intention of the piece, whether that be like a good scare, a good story, or like a completely immersive world.
Mm-hmm. Well, in a sense too, you gotta, in another sense, it's almost like making sure you account for those sort of fight or flight sort of people, because people will react differently to being frightened. I actually equate something like this to the Universal Studios Halloween Horror Night scare zones, or scare mazes or houses. Those ones are a lot more linear, but they're the same thing. It's more immersive. You're sort of brought into a different world, and there's a lot of jump scares. There's a lot of times that like whether you expect it or not, somebody is going to pop out and be like scare you. But you also have to be careful because there's many times, and it has happened many a times, where people will, get scared, but they'll react. Whether that means somebody gets punched, somebody gets kicked, somebody gets shoved, like you got to be careful, especially when it comes to adults. Adults are not gonna, sometimes the adults are not gonna mess around when they're scared.
Totally.
So you got to be careful. But I mean, that's all part of the process. So I would assume so.
Absolutely. Another thing that's really interesting about this is obviously we talked a lot about the audience, but the performers are having an experience as well. And they need to feel, even though they're the provocateurs, they're the ones that are like causing the scares, doing all these things. They also want to feel safe. They want to feel like they can perform their best. That, as I say, immersive theatre and the formulas that are being created are constantly changing and learning. One thing that we did in Goosebumps, which we sort of learned from, was that we more or less had performers in the same role throughout the entirety of the show, which meant you could have someone sat in a tent telling a story 10, 15 times in a night, and the effect on they're doing these scary stories in these environments. They're meeting lots of different people constantly. Like the effect on their sort of like mentality can be quite unexpected. And so in other productions and towards the end of Goosebumps, we were doing character swaps, either day on, day off, or throughout the night. So people would take on different roles throughout the night, or different roles night on, night off. So they themselves had a varied experience whilst giving the best they can to the audience members. So yeah, like being a performer, like stuck on your own on a 15-minute cycle in a tent telling the same ghost story to a group of adults can, I think, be quite detrimental to your mental health.
Absolutely.
So I don't really know how it is over there, but I mean, obviously Halloween playing a big part here in the States with haunted houses, and you have, people who work in haunted houses, scare actors and everything. Do you have that over there? Was it like kind of like a thing where you had to have basically like a casting call for people who have done something like that before, or were these more like people who mostly did like theater and stuff, and that's why it was changed out so much like that?
Everyone that we had involved was a proper actor. Brilliant actors, all of them. They worked so hard. They had incredible skill levels, incredible craft. We were doing a theatre show, and actually, it was hard to know what people expected from Goosebumps. What they got it was really interesting. We had a whole variety of reviews, on the whole, really, really positive. But there were a few reviews which were sort of polarized, where, I think you could put two together from relatively well-known sources, which say, oh, the stories were fantastic and engaging and modern and clever, but the space was trashy and like a sort of fun house.
Mm-hmm.
And undermines the integrity of the tales. And then we had another one, which was the tales were uninteresting, but the world was really engaging and rich, and you could explore it and all those sorts of things. So I think, it goes to show how different expectations can play a part in how these things are received. But I think we were definitely not trying to do a jump scare Halloween thing, and we worked with proper actors, amazing script, really good production designers to create it was a show. It didn't, it was nothing else. We did have one amazing little so one of our very physical performers, puppeteer, come scarecrow, come Slappy, was an actor, an Australian actor, who we were very, very excited to have. His name was, hang on one moment.
If it's Bjorn, I'm gonna laugh so hard.
What's that?
I was just saying, if it was Bjorn, I'm gonna laugh so hard because he's obviously Australian, and we had an amazing performer called Matthew Waters, who is an Australian actor who was famous for playing Bronson from Round the Twist. Do you guys know Round the Twist?
Mm-hmm.
So if people who are into Goosebumps and who know Goosebumps from that period of time, like Round the Twist was the Australian version. It was like fun and crazy, and so having these two worlds like mushed together with this amazing actor in between was an absolute treat for me. Round the Twist was like, Goosebumps was maybe like a couple of years after Round the Twist, and so Round the Twist was like my Goosebumps, I suppose. But I was always really aware of Goosebumps. The books were very popular when I was younger, but like the TV show came out just a couple of years after I'd sort of like put some of that stuff down. Mm-hmm. But Round the Twist was it for me, and we had one of the actors from Round the Twist in our production of Goosebumps, which was just brilliant.
That is really cool. That's really cool, actually. I really like that. I know
if you haven't seen Round the Twist, check it out. It's just the best. In fact, in the same sort of world of all of this stuff, Stranger Things, when they did, I think it was series 2 of Stranger Things, they released a trailer that they did in the style of Round the Twist, which you can look up online. It was a sort of like special release thing, and it was brilliant. It really sets the tone. So there's out there. I
didn't know that.
Stranger Things,
check it out,
because they were like those showmakers were like real fans of Round the Twist, because it does that exact thing of like setting up a world where all the rules are different or anything can happen. And it sort of it was like an anthology series like Goosebumps, except it all happened around this one family and the people in their lives.
Yeah. It's a show I knew about, but I wasn't too familiar with it because I didn't hear much about it. But surprisingly, ever since we started this podcast, I start to hear more and more people bring it up. So I'm like, maybe I guess that show had a secret fan base I didn't know about.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I guess what most people would say about Goosebumps too. So
yeah, exactly.
But so I'm curious. So when it comes to all this sort of production stuff, there's a lot of things that can come to the final product. But is there any concepts, any books that were maybe considered to be adapted that didn't make it into the final product?
That's a really good question. I think there probably were. So Gabe and Tom came to us with a script that was pretty fully realised. And what we did was we worked with each of those stories. And as I said, in terms of referencing lots of things, we did try and feed in lots of different references. But I'll be completely honest, I did lots of good prep for this interview. What I didn't prep was all the stuff we didn't do. So I can't pull those out of my head at this moment. But yeah, there were lots, and I think actually that really struck a chord with me. I've seen a couple of the films that have been out recently, and it really reminded me of like the depth of the Goosebumps universe and all the different opportunities there are for different stories and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we brought up to this point that some of the stories adapted were like Night of the Living Dummy, Haunted Mask, Horrorland. Say Cheese and Die, Blob That Ate Everyone, Stay Out of the Basement, and I believe Scarecrow Walks at Midnight.
And
the Cuckoo Clock of Doom. I actually, I didn't know about that one until I was looking through some images and I saw the clock set, and I was like, oh, that's really cool. Like, it's interesting, and there are a lot of Goosebumps stories out there that make for really good sort of horror. Horror attractions. You have Welcome to Dead House, which is essentially like a big haunted house in and of itself. You have like some of the stuff like Phantom of the Auditorium, which they did a whole musical about. You have Attack of the Mutant, which is sort of like a comic book world that you can put yourself into. Some of that stuff. So it's such a lucrative franchise in terms of storytelling. So it's pretty interesting. But
so out of the stuff that you actually did make, though, through all that, I mean, was there one that was like a particular favorite of yours that you just had a great time designing?
Every space had a different plus to it. It was a real playground of stuff for me. I mean, so the Haunted Mask Shop was great because you got to build like sort of shop front with a sort of like Victorian aesthetic. We made all these crazy masks for it. You sort of walked through and then were surrounded in this sort of we've got like a sort of like spiral walkway inside one of these tunnels. So that like structurally was really exciting. Don't Go Into the Basement was really exciting because we did it on 2 floors, and the mezzanine is actually a grate. So what would happen is you'd be doing the story up in the kitchen where the boyfriend was sort of replaced by this creature, but you could see downstairs through the grill. We'd dim the lights upstairs, and downstairs you'd light it, and you have this sort of multi-layered thing, and then you go down and experience that. I mean, the aesthetic of the Scarecrow Walks at Midnight was just a complete delight. You know, creating that amazing Midwestern aesthetic and working on those scarecrows was just like gorgeous. You know, Say Cheese and Die had the junk shop, which like I love. You know, I worked with Punch Drunk in Richmond on some of their like kids shows where we would create these amazing junk shops, and like I know what opportunity for storytelling there is in those places. And then, I mean, Night of the Living Dummy was just, you know, it's just a beautiful, great big dark tunnel full of smoke, using light curtains to sort of blind you, so these things could appear like out of nowhere, and then a giant dummy comes out of an organ that's like whirring away. I mean, every part of it was a total delight to create.
One thing that would have been really cool to see is maybe a room of like pianos with severed hands for like piano lessons can be murder. Almost similar to like the TV show where you just walk into that big corridor and there's just like the hands just like doom, 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 like that sort of thing. That would have been amazing.
Totally.
Like
our ultimate budget wasn't that high, unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah, you're bound by budget, but that's what's so great about Goosebumps is there's so many possibilities. Like it's a grab bag of possibilities. All right, so we're going to take a look at some photos, and let's start out first by taking a look at this particular cover or this particular art. Now, you guys may recognize the artist behind it. It's our good friend, Tim Jacobus, who did this amazing piece of artwork to promote the show. What was it like getting Tim on board to do some artwork?
I mean, it was a total treat. There's no other way of saying it. Like, so what he's illustrated here is the tunnel that is the access point for the vaults. It's a very famous tunnel in Waterloo that's sprayed entirely with graffiti. It changes almost daily. You know, so we provided him with photos of the space, and he sort of reinterpreted it as the Goosebumps image you can see there. Like that sort of sense of site specific, because obviously we're in London, so we're, you know, miles away from a lot of like the places where the original stories were set. So we wanted to sort of transpose the sense of where we were and the site-specific nature of it with the stories that we were telling. And so to have him reimagine our world a little bit like this was just like an absolute delight. You know,
absolutely.
What a guy.
If you want something like that done, I mean, Tim Jacobus is your guy. Because I mean, even looking at like just photo like from a glance, you'll obviously notice the man and maybe even the alligators in the bright light. But you could even look closer at this image. If you look at the shadow on the wall to the left there, you can see there's a hand like grabbing at the shadow of the man that's on the wall. Like that is amazing right there. And there's bats, and there's a big hole in the roof with like a little bit of like almost like a purplish sunset. Like it's
Yeah,
just the colors are so garish and it's incredible. It's very on point for Tim Jacobus.
totally.
Hmm. Now, going into the first picture, we have from Scarecrow Walks at Midnight right here, and you can see those amazing designs for the scarecrows with the pumpkin heads and the very like lanky sort of design. It's not human at all how those arms and legs work, which is incredible.
Mhm. Yeah, so we had different scarecrows that had sort of different functionality. Like one had sort of like a long broken leg that it's trailing behind. One was had extra long arms and legs, so it was sort of like a spider scarecrow. One of them was sort of really built up and like heavy, and one of them was sort of like completely like lanky and floppy. So they all had their movements. We had incredible performers. As I said, Matthew was one of them. We had incredible performers who would like using their physicality to like really, really get into these different scarecrows.
And you can see the lighting here is super cool because the cornfield has got that very orange like tint to it. It's very in line with sort of like a fall aesthetic. But then you have from what it looks like the barn where another scarecrow is peeking out from the window there, but you have that super blue, bright blue light. So it brings your attention to it, and it also adds like another aspect of eeriness to the whole scenario. And it's really well done looking. I just love how this looks.
Great.
And then here we have the haunted mask. So we have the design of the mask right there, and it's very interesting looking. I love I can't tell if those are horns at the top or if that's the actor's hands.
Yeah, those are
hands.
horns. There are some. If you look at some of the other, I sent you some other images as well of the designs and development of those. So, it's not the closest up version of the mask, and it's not the most deformed one either. We had several different versions of the mask. So the more the performer wore it, the more grotesque it got through the scene. So
I must say I do love the look of this house though. Just like the how very run down. You can see like on the window trim, it's like there's a lot of paint chipped off it. The floor looks very dirty, so it gives sort of that haunted house sort of feel, like a rundown space.
exactly.
Next up, we got the designs of some of the Slappies. Holy moly, look at those faces. So once again, going back to the discussion earlier about the exaggerated proportions, I mean, it's very different than the Slappy you might be used to on the book. But again, it adds to that sort of nightmare aesthetic of like where everything is much scarier in your head, and sort of adds to that. And as you said before, Slappy's design changed even throughout the show. So this is from when there would be the multiple Slappies, I would assume.
That's right, exactly. So you started with, the dummy appeared in various iterations around the performance, and then when you found yourself in the big room at the end, then that Slappy would disappear, and these ones would appear and sort of multiply, and then there was a huge one. I don't know if you've got pictures of that later.
Absolutely. Here we have it appears to be this one of the stairways. I would assume, is this the stairway to stay out of the basement?
Exactly.
Yep.
So it's leading up to the kitchen. So yeah.
Yep. You can see there's like moss growing around the trim at the bottom of the stairs there, which is really cool looking. I love that. And the blue light. And then here we have a picture of the Horrorland set. So this one definitely looks to be one of the longer areas of the maze. So you have, of course, it all looks very run down. You have the Horrorland like sign letters. One of them is like missing the wood that goes on top of it. So it's exposing all those lights. And then as you can see back there, and we'll get to a picture that has better view, the horror head that is like the mouth of the stage is a really good touch. So here you can get a better look at it. You have the big hands.
Yeah. So with this one, we were trying, because this room is so full of sort of inherent architecture, had lots of pipes and cables and things like that. We were trying to lean into the sort of aesthetic of the like a structural aesthetic, which was like the like bits of a fairground ride, things where there'd be pipes and wires and lines, things like that. So all of that blended in really nicely.
Now, are those hands at the sides there? Are those the hands that would belong to Slappy?
You spotted it, yeah. So for the production photos, we utilise these in this area so as not to give away the Slappy piece later. But each one of those is about the size of like 2.5 people. So, they'd be operated by like one person, like a giant, great big thing. But we popped them in there because they look good for the production photos.
Yeah. Oh, it adds to the, the horror head. So it almost looks like they belong to the horror.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
And again, not to give away that they're actually part of Slappy. So it's pretty interesting. All right. Next up, we have another shot from The Haunted Mask. Here you have the actor looking into the mirror. And then it's a closer up look at the Slappy masks.
So these Tom's promotional photos for his Tom Howell's promotional photos for the Ministry of Masks.
Mm-hmm. And they look really well done. I love the sort of I love the dimples on the cheeks and how they're supposed to almost have like a childish aspect to them, but the facial structure is just really, really grotesque, so it sort of cancels out the cutesiness of it all. And then the hair colors are just awesome. I love the purple hair.
Yeah. During this time of when I was working on this production, that was sort of around that time, I've often used like nursery rhymes and children's nursery rhyme illustration books, and old toys, old puppets have been a big part of my aesthetic. So getting to play with these motifs in these designs was a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. And then we have a shot here at Stay Out of the Basement. So we have the dad with the plant growing out of his head. It's way more exaggerated than it would be in many others. But I love the design of it. And then here we have the cuckoo clock of doom. So you have a boom clock in the middle here. And I love this design. I love the sort of like the way that the clock is on the ground, so you're walking on it.
Yeah.
And then we have a closer look at the mask shop, which I love. You can see
I love this.
It's very Victorian, as you said, and I love the way this looks, and the masks and the windows. And then,
lots of fun. That one. So this is downstairs in the basement with all our sort of testicular sacs hanging up in the...
They do look like that, don't they?
Yeah.
I love this. I love that it's almost kind of like it's almost like Invasion of the Body Snatchers down here, like mixed with Goosebumps, and I love the mixture of purple and green. This might be my favorite like lighting effect in the show is this mixture of purple and green. I always consider those to be the colors of Goosebumps right there.
For sure.
And it looks very alien. I love that. I love the sort of alien aspect to adapting the story. And again, like
as I said, this one and the Scarecrow were two of the larger group performances. And in Scarecrow, and actually, it actually comes through more in some of the drawings that I sent through to you. But these were the two where we were really playing with that sort of like contrasting lighting effects. The orange and the blue in Scarecrow with like the shafts of light coming through the wooden slats. And this one, it was all about the neons and the hyper saturated sort of you can see from the picture.
Yep. And then we have an elevator shaft with a monster on the other side.
Yeah, lots of fun.
This looks exactly out of a Goosebumps cover right here. I don't know if it's the way that the picture is shot or if this is like legitimate like architecture, but this looks exactly like a Goosebumps cover right here. Like you could probably put this, you could probably take like a template of a Goosebumps book, put it on top of here, and I feel like most people would think that it was in a real book.
That this was a lost book somehow. Yeah.
Don't go into the
100%.
elevator or something like that.
Of course, it was a brilliant experience, but it was just a wooden box with a sliding door and some good speakers. But it did really feel like, with the lighting effect that ran down the side of the door, we had an LED strip that made it look like you were passing floors, that sort of thing, and then all the rumbling noises, and it's great, really good.
Yeah. Almost seems like the sort of effect in Disney's Haunted Mansion when you're in like the room before you go into the ride with the stretching walls. It's like a sort of like effect, but you're really not going anywhere, but you make it seem like you are, which is always really cool. And here we have a typewriter. I'm assuming that this plays into effect with the blob that ate everyone, because
That's right.
that was the main motif of that book.
Yeah.
And then we have this lovely image right here. We have a severed head.
I think this was definitely
Nazi from Seinfeld.
Yeah, this was definitely like very deliberately a prop-like object. This was in the Say Cheese and Die junk shop, so it was a deliberate attempt to have something very schlocky in there.
Mm-hmm.
So
I love it. It's awesome.
Yeah.
So here we have it looks like this is the kitchen set for Stay Out of the Basement.
This is the basement, yeah. So we did one end of the room was like the whole thing was that it was a couple who were moving into their new ideal home, like a young couple, in their 20s, getting their first place. And so one end of the room we'd like filled with boxes to make it look like they were unpacking, and then obviously the home sweet home of it all was undermined by this sort of like eerie basement happenings below.
Mm-hmm. I love that the boxes make like a pathway.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, here this is at the beginning of the attraction, but this graffiti that says "Adventurer Beware."
Where did you find all these photos?
Yep, did a lot of digging. And here we have Slappy. I believe
That's Slappy's guest. Yeah.
So again, going for that sort of, I really like the aesthetic of Slappy being sort of like a very, I would say between Victorian and like, even like a 40s, 30s dummy. Mm-hmm. This was also done in the 2023 series, which I was really all for. I love that sort of trace back to vaudeville, almost sort of ventriloquism. Here we have a picture of some of the stocks over in the Scarecrow scene with a little more bluer lighting on them, which looks amazing. It's a little more nighttime looking in this vibe. All right, so here we have I'm assuming from sort of like a carnival show.
This was from the kids production. So this was one of the pieces from the kids production.
So we have Welcome the Brave, and what is this supposed to be exactly? Looks like a blue monkey.
I think it was a blue monkey, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't remember, to be honest.
Maybe
I think it was
the Beast from the East.
Yeah.
I choose to believe that. All right, here we have another picture from Stay Out of the Basement. We have the plant clone right here with some more of those amazing pods in the background here. And again, the blues and or the greens and purples, just man, they look so good. And I cannot stress enough how much I love this lighting here.
Right.
For Stay Out of the Basement. Now this looks like it's from Say Cheese and Die.
Yeah.
You got the big pictures in the back, and of course you have the camera. Now,
so this is from the kids' production of Say Cheese and Die.
Yep. So you got the kid getting hit in the mouth with a soccer ball. Yeah. It's really cool. I love that. You can definitely tell what's a little more kid friendly and what's a little more horror.
Yeah.
Like something like this is definitely like probably going to scare the hell out of a kid, but something like this is a little more goofy and silly. Still playing to the Goosebumps thing. Now here
was that actually anybody's kid in production who they used for that picture, or was that just?
I think it probably was. Yeah, I think it probably was. I can't remember.
Yeah. Now here we have, I would assume is the big finale of Slappy, this monstrous looking puppet.
So this is actually the medium Slappy.
Oh, really? So this isn't
Yeah.
even the large one.
No,
Holy
this
moly.
is the large one.
It is really grotesque looking. This almost looks like something out of like Return to Oz, I would say.
Yeah.
Sort of that design. I love it. So here we have it was like another shot from the kids section, but we have the dummy version of Slappy right here.
Yeah.
And then here's a better look at the haunted mask. So yeah, you can see that there are horns on the mask. And the eyes are like very, very yellow. Almost looks like a really grotesque looking frog, I would say. In a sense. All right, I had to bring attention to this little number right here.
That's
the
funny. I was literally thinking it kind of looks more like a goblin, and then here we are with the goblin menu.
Goblin menu. So this is some food and that was offered at the event. So take a look at these names. How do you take your burger, sir? You have red meat, clucking from the deep blue, straight from the basement, and or would you rather to say cheese and die with a toasty? So it looks like these are all like sandwiches, burgers, and whatnot.
Yeah.
These look pretty good.
No, they were delicious. Yeah, definitely. There's a great catering team at the Vaults.
You got from the deep blue right here is a teriyaki tuna steak, kami seaweed salad, wasabi mayo, crispy shallots. For $9. Wow, that's actually not that bad.
It was 2016.
Yeah. That was before,
that's true.
That was before everything got bad.
Pre-COVID.
All right, so now we're moving on to some of the concept art, courtesy of Sam. So here we have concept art of the Horrorland set.
That's right, yeah.
I love the colors on this. It looks almost like clown-ish, almost like circusy.
Yeah.
It looks really nice. I love it.
Thank you.
All right, so here we have some art from Say Cheese and Die.
So this was to sort of show you, I guess, the sort of thought process, how we go in to start designing. So I'd like got the layout of the room and then some of the references of what it is we're trying to achieve. So the way we did it in the adult show was actually these, the entire place was done, one of the scenes was done like a modern bar. And then, there were these kind of great big screens that seemed to crack and break in allusion to sort of like more modern types of like photo sharing on phones and that sort of thing. And we had a big jump scare where the glass ceiling at one stage was just completely covered in dead birds that dropped out the sky. That was one of the big jump scares that we had there.
That is awesome. I love that. I love this picture right here. It almost looks like just the wall is just covered with photographs and they're being silhouetted by a bright light. Like, I love that idea of being in a giant room where you're just surrounded by photographs in a very eerie sense that's similar to the book. I really like that.
Nickelback does too.
And then we have the haunted mask here. So I love this drawing right here of the novelty shop and the haunted mask right here in the middle.
Good fun.
Yep.
Yeah, the execution of that to bring it to life was really cool. I really loved the whole aesthetic of this. It was.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just love it.
All right, here we have some designs of the scarecrows, and wow, these are amazing. These heads,
I'm digging this art.
Thank you. Yeah, I really enjoyed
some like scary stories vibes off the art.
I was gonna say, yeah, it's like Tim Burton or like something you'd see out of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Like, you could probably see this right next to like the Jangly Man or something like that. Now this one right here in the bottom here looks a little more similar to something that you would see in the book with the hat and the clothes, but this one just looks like otherworldly. It doesn't even look like it's anything in this world, in a sense. So really dig that. Here we got a few more designs, a little more colors. These pumpkin designs are amazing. You have like this one that's a little more toothy.
Yeah.
You have this one that looks almost like rotting, which I really
that was a really fun one to make, actually, the sort of collapsed pumpkin face.
All right, here we got Stay Out of the Basement. This one right here, I really love the green coming out of the checkerboard floor.
Yeah.
Is that supposed to be like a see-through thing, or is that supposed to almost be like a slime pool in the floor?
So it's a grate. So it's light coming up from beneath. You can sort of see it in that amazing La Chapelle reference on the bottom left, and then in the two states. So like in the state you'd see it lit up in normally, and then the state you'd see it lit up from beneath. So you really got the green. So in the purple kitchen upstairs, you then got the green light like creeping through, and yeah.
I love the aesthetic of this particular one because again, you have the upstairs and then the downstairs, and the upstairs is supposed to be like a little more cheery. It almost looks like it was going for like a 1950s like sitcom-esque look to it, which contrasts with the horror underneath, which I like. So here we have some concept art behind Scarecrow Walks at Midnight. Now look at this. Like, I can't tell which one I like more, to be honest. Oh, looks so good.
Yeah, that's fun. I really enjoyed making that one.
Mm-hmm. So we can see right here on the bottom, there's a model of how the maze would look. So you have sort of a curvature going here until it leads until the very wide open area with the house on the other side.
Yeah, I like that middle one. Just the whole moon scene lighting up the cornfield and the scarecrows. It's awesome. I love that.
All right, here we got some design concepts for Slappy, going from, creepy to holy moly. That's like Courage the Cowardly Dog right
straight
there.
Out of your nightmares.
That is like something you'd see out of like a really messed up episode of Courage.
Yeah, kind of. I can see that.
Yeah, it's again going for that very sort of clownish sort of design that you would see in a lot of old children's toys, and then just deteriorating into something that is just utterly horrifying. All right, so I'm assuming this is from the finale with the giant Slappy?
Exactly. So we had this sort of large structure with this sort of organ pipe and various things that played this amazing finale music by the Tiger Lilies, and a great big walkway. So some of it was like performed there in front of you. It was also the place that the big Slappy came from. And then it was the place that the really big Slappy came from that sort of burst through a painting at the top, where that golden face you can see at the top was sort of it was actually just a very simple painting there, and then that burst open and got a great big head, sort of about 6 foot wide, 6 foot tall, burst through with a great big opening mouth on a line that he had running down the center of the room.
That is so cool. I love that. It's like the perfect way to cap it off, like just something like that. All right, so here we got some design concepts on the Haunted Mask.
Yes.
Here it looks very a lot more feminine in a sense, with the sort of the lips and the color around the eyes. But I love this. I love this design. It looks very like elongated in a sense. We got more Slappy designs right here, Slappy masks. And then some of the scarecrows. So, like I said, you got the more collapsing one, which I'm just absolutely a fan of. And then this one that has a lot more toothy sort of grin, and the sort of like, one
raised
eye, brow up, that sort of thing. Doing like the DreamWorks face, I call it. All right. Here we got some.
So those are the two sort of versions of the Haunted Mask. So there was the one on the left is the sort of early version where she puts it on, and then the one on the right is where she's like, where it's sort of completely taken control of her, and it was sort of painted up in the style that you saw before.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
All right, and then this final photo is an email that you sent to me because it was funny, and it is funny. Just out of context, can Slime Rob do other things, or is he too slimy? So, if you don't mind me asking, Who's Slime Rob?
So Rob was the character in the Blob.
Oh.
And this is just a really good example of when you're putting on a production and you're sort of like working out like who's available, when to do what and where. Like this little and everyone's working under pressure, and there were these very complex systems where like one person's in one room doing one thing, one person's in another room doing nothing, and they swap. You know, sometimes you get these little shorthands that pop up that show you how like the show making process happens, and this is just one example of that.
I just love that. Is like, is he too slimy to do other things? It's great. I love it. Now, there is one more thing that we're going to do. We're actually going to take a look at the Google Maps walkthrough of Goosebumps Alive that is still up. I was able to find it, and we're going to take a look at it. So, going over here. So, we start right here.
Which brings the question. So, real quick, like, what do you guys, did anybody ever film a walkthrough through there, or was it more... like...
I think there may have been some aspects of it were filmed. Yeah.
So we start here right at the beginning. So you have, I believe, it was said that Banksy founded this tunnel right here where the entrance is, which is pretty interesting.
I think the street art subculture founded that tunnel. I think everyone, as you can see, has had something to do, and it not only its inception, but it's also its continued life.
This one right up here is really speaking to me. So turning over here, you go right in. There's the goblin menu you can see right there. So walking inside, you have this awesome sign right here, Goosebumps Alive. And then you have the sign that says Adventure Beware right here. So going in, we got this big creepy hand. And then we walk inside.
So I would say as well that from my memory, this walkthrough is sort of done in what we call house lights, where there's sort of the sort of some of the atmospheric lights are on, but mostly it's sort of overlit, so it can be filmed. So the actual thing was sort of much more atmospheric.
Here we got a sign that has all the social media on there, and then some stairs up here, more seating. All right, so we walk through over here. Oh yeah, one thing I forgot to mention is that lots of alcohol at this event.
That was just for the kids' show.
Yeah, that was just for the kiddies. The adults didn't get to touch any of it. Looks like we got a little shop here with some art. I can see there's some artwork of the Tim Jacobus. There's some CDs for the Tiger Lilies if you look really close right there. So that's really awesome. Gallery merchandise. We got some masks on the wall from Ministry of Masks.
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing.
Look at some of these. So yeah,
fantastic.
You can see some of these are from Alice, and there's the Mickey Mouse right there. Clowns. Yeah, that's really cool. I love those masks. And there's some more over here, actually.
Got some more.
Whoa, look at all those.
Plague doctors.
Yeah. That almost looks like that one dude from the Dark Knight.
Joker one.
Well, those are all Batman masks. They're all Dark Knight.
Yeah.
That's
Dark Knight Rises Bane. Yeah.
That's the one the Joker wears right there on the bottom.
Yeah, they're all from the Dark Knight trilogy.
Whoa.
Very cool.
Where did I just go? I got transported.
I don't know.
Well, I guess while we're here, here's Horrorland. So you get a better look at some of the stuff we had here. So here you can see some of the tunnels we were talking about. Ooh, what's this over here?
I think it's the elevator.
Oh yeah, look at that.
The lift.
There's the lift. Oh, look at that.
That's so crazy. It looks like a painting. Like that's the crazy part. Like even the photo we saw, like we said that looks like a Goosebumps cover. It really did.
It really does.
It doesn't even look like it's in reality. The way it's lit and everything. It was crazy. Hey, how'd you get back here?
You're not supposed to be back here.
Oh yeah, so this is the blob. So what happened was, as he was writing more and more things into reality, basically we started off with these curtains closed, and then there was a great big blackout scene, and then we basically filled all of the edges of the space with expandable foam space filler, and loads of TVs, objects, hubcaps, like all of the things that are sort of like expressive of like excessive wealth, and pictures, and laced them all through with like gold glowing lights. So suddenly all of the screens went back, and you were completely surrounded by these kind of like grotesque golden blob of like consumerism. It was lots of fun.
I love that. I love, just this giant heap of stuff. And yeah, it is sort of blobish in its design, and the glowing nature of it all. It really is good looking.
Sort of all the stuff, if you were 21 and suddenly had a shitload of money, it's all the sort of nonsense you'd buy.
Yeah.
Some of this gives me like Beetlejuice vibes.
It does, doesn't it? Like some of them, like those corridors look kind of Beetlejuices.
So this was the show start where everyone gathered before beginnings. This is a sort of foyer area of like the bar,
slime coming out from everywhere.
Exactly, backlit sign.
So we can see some of the symbols around here. So we got like a rat. We got a little flower starfish. It looks like there's a crow, snake.
So did you ever get R.L. Stine to come visit this and do it, or?
I don't think so. Not that I remember.
To get to some of the other places. Oh, you even got
there's that hand.
Here we go. So here we're in a little more of the scarecrow. So if you see there,
that's really cool.
It's back there, surrounded by all the. Oh, look, even got one right here. That's really cool looking. And then
the one on stilts came around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is what we saw, where the one was up here, and then the guy with the one with the stilts was walking around. You can get a closer look at the house right here. So you can see it is very typical of like an old school farmhouse. You got the kitchen table and the silverware.
Yeah, custom made wallpaper by Harriet.
Yeah. Moving back over here.
What'd you make the corn stalks out of?
They were just brown paper and bamboo canes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Plats.
All right, well, that's smart.
It makes for a good effect.
All reusable, all recyclable. Yeah.
All right, so here it looks like this is the curio shop from Say Cheese and Die.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can definitely see this is like a grab bag of Easter eggs around here. We got a dummy up there.
Mm-hmm.
Like that. TVs.
It's like Dennis.
Oh, dummy. It does kind of look like Dennis, doesn't it? All right. We go over here. Oh, there's our friend, the severed head. All right. So, whoa, we got a bunch of chairs upside down.
Yeah.
So here.
So this is the Say Cheese and Die bar.
Okay.
Yep. And you can see on the wall, and there's a bunch of photographs.
You look up above your head. You can see that the ceiling was designed like a sort of broken mirror. And then if you look at, you can see the birds that have fallen on the roof of the clear part. So they made a very loud noise when they smashed into the glass.
That is a really good effect. I love that. It's almost like the fact that everything looks like broken. It almost looks like it's giving the effect that it's going to break at any second.
Actually,
adds a feeling.
Break reality.
Ease. Yeah, break reality. Exactly. Oh, is this what I think it is?
Yeah, so that's the great big organ at the end.
Ah, yeah, you can see both the hands right here, and then there's a silhouette of Slappy back there. You can see that is really cool. I love this design here, just this big empty corridor that leads you down there.
And then above you, all we've got is the light curtain. So that was a really, really good simple design that created like almost a physical. Well, it was like a physical wall that could just appear and disappear, basically, made out of smoke and light. It's really nice.
That is incredible. I love that. So it's pretty interesting to see all that, how everything was structured and all that. It's just amazing how everything looked. I do have one more question before we end things off for today. Yeah. So the show wasn't very long-lived. It did only last, I believe, about a month. Has there ever been any talks about bringing it to another location, or was it just kind of a one and done?
I think it was. Sorry. That's why. Okay. I think it was always open to like going on. With an undertaking like this, the venues are often very specific, and finding a place as unique and as brilliant for those opportunities as the Vaults is quite rare. I've had other shows try and transfer from there, and it's not always straightforward. But we did, for instance, transfer Alice's Adventures Underground to Shanghai in China. But in order to find it anywhere similar, we actually had to rent a completely dilapidated mall and repurpose the entirety of the inside in it with concrete and everything like that. So, when you create a space, when you create a show for a space that's so specific, you really have to work hard to transfer it. And I think all of us went on to do really exciting things after doing the show. Mm-hmm. So I think it just exists in that little moment of time.
Yeah, well, and we appreciate that you guys got to get together at one point and create this incredible experience, and hopefully it's not the last of its kind. So hopefully we can see more stuff like it in the future. Well, that's going to do it for today's episode of the Goosebumps Crew Podcast. Sam, thank you so much for joining us here today and talking Goosebumps with us. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been absolutely great. It's been really nice to walk through some of that, old drawings and work and things like that. It reminds me, what a fantastic experience it was. It's great to have everyone so interested in it. I've got that and some other bits and pieces on my Instagram. So if you want to follow me, you can do that on @DownToTheWire, and Wire is spelled WYER, same as my surname, Down to the Wire. And yeah, there are lots of other delightful little bits and pieces like that on there.
Absolutely, and I'll make sure to link to that in the description below. Go check it out. Support Sam if you can. He's awesome, and he's doing a lot more productions in the future, so support him. Please, 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 on behalf of us, thank you again so much for joining us. And as always, make sure you follow the Goosebumps Crew by, if you like today's episode, you leave a like and comment. Make sure you subscribe to the Goosebumps Crew Podcast on YouTube. Follow us on our audio platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and iHeartRadio. And follow the Goosebumps Crew on social media at Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook. Also, make sure you check out Nick and Bjorn at Goosebumps Aussie Fan and Shawin on Instagram and their YouTubes. They really do deserve it. All of those links are in the description below. We'll have a new episode for you next week. But until then, this has been the Goosebumps Crew Podcast from all of us here. We want to wish you all to take care, stay safe, and have a very scary day.